The grandfather clock chimed 11 times, echoing through the cold silence of our Sterling Heights estate. Outside, the November rain battered the glass, drowning out the anxiety that had kept me awake for months. I sat alone, waiting for a husband who was late again. Suddenly, a frantic pounding on the front door shattered the quiet. I opened it to find my neighbor shivering in the downpour, her face pale with terror. My name is Julia Vance, and at 32 years old, I felt less like the mistress of a grand estate and more like a ghost haunting its empty halls. The expansive living room of our home in Sterling Heights, Virginia, was swallowed by shadows, illuminated only by the faint, amber glow of the wall sconces. Outside, the November rain was relentless. It lashed against the French windows with a violence that made the glass rattle in its frames, a cold and angry rhythm that matched the knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I sat stiffly on the velvet armchair, my hands folded in my lap, staring at the cold dinner that had been waiting on the mahogany table for 3 hours. Mark was late again. It had become a pattern recently, one that he always explained away with a charming smile and a logical excuse about late meetings or urgent client crises. But logic could not settle the tremors in my hands or the fog that seemed to wrap around my brain lately. I rubbed my temples, trying to massage away the dull headache that had become my constant companion over the last 6 months. My reflection in the darkened window showed a woman I barely recognized. My skin was sallow, my eyes rimmed with dark circles that no amount of concealer could hide. I felt fragile, as if a strong wind could shatter me. Mark told me constantly that I was just oversensitive. He said my memory lapses were due to stress and that I needed to rest more, to let him handle everything. He was so perfect, so caring, yet I felt like I was slowly fading away. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed. It was 11 o'clock at night. The heavy, metallic sound reverberated through the silent house, each toll emphasizing how alone I really was. Suddenly, a pair of headlights swept across the front lawn, cutting through the darkness. My heart leaped into my throat. I stood up, smoothing my dress, rehearsing the smile I would offer him so he wouldn't say I was being moody again. I watched the lights approach the driveway, holding my breath. But the car did not slow down. The beams washed over the living room window, blinding me for a split second, and then continued down the wet asphalt of the street. The disappointment was physical. It felt like a punch to the gut. I sank back down onto the armrest, the silence rushing back in to fill the void left by the passing engine. Then, it happened. A frantic pounding on the front door shattered the stillness. It was not a polite knock. It was a desperate, heavy thudding, as if someone were hammering against the wood with their fists. In a high-security neighborhood like ours, where the loudest sound was usually a leaf blower, this was terrifying. My pulse hammered in my ears as I walked toward the foyer. I checked the peephole, but the rain obscured the view. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open. Standing on my porch, soaked to the bone and shivering violently, was Sarah? She lived in the colonial-style mansion directly across the street. We were not friends. We waved when getting the mail or made polite small talk at the neighborhood block party once a year. But that was the extent of it. Seeing her here, at this hour, without a coat, her silk blouse clinging to her skin and her hair plastered to her face, sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold wind blowing into the hallway. She looked at me with eyes wide with terror. Her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely form words. "Mrs. Vance. Julia. I'm sorry. I can't keep quiet anymore." Her voice broke on the last word, dissolving into a sob. I did not need to ask why she was here. A primal instinct, buried deep beneath the layers of confusion and medication Mark had fed me, suddenly snapped awake. I reached out and grabbed her freezing hand, pulling her across the threshold. "Come inside," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. As I closed the door against the storm, I knew with absolute certainty that the life I thought I knew was over. The nightmare had arrived on my doorstep, and it was soaking wet. I led Sarah into the living room, where she collapsed onto the edge of the cream sofa. She refused to take off her wet shoes, and water dripped steadily from her hair onto the Persian rug. But I did not care. My hands shook as I poured a glass of water from the pitcher on the side table and held it out to her. She pushed my hand away, her eyes wild. Her knuckles were white as she gripped her smartphone. "No, I don't want water," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "We don't have time." I sat on the coffee table opposite her, trying to catch her gaze. "Sarah, tell me what is going on. Is Mark hurt?" She shook her head violently. "Mark is at my house, right now, across the street." She took a ragged breath. "He isn't having an affair with me. Julia, I know that is what you might think. He is in a meeting with my husband." I stared at her, confusion warring with the dread in my chest. Sarah's husband was the director of the local investment bank. A meeting at 11 o'clock at night. Why would Mark be discussing business now? Because they couldn't do it here, Sarah said. Because here, you might hear them. She unlocked her phone with trembling fingers and held it up between us. I recorded this 10 minutes ago. I left my phone under the study door while I went to the kitchen. She pressed play. The sound of static filled the room, followed by the clinking of ice against glass. Then, a voice cut through the silence. It was cool, calculated, and terrifyingly familiar. It was Mark. "The dosage has been perfect," Mark's voice said from the speaker, sounding utterly detached. "She is seeing shadows that aren't there. Yesterday she cried because she thought she lost her keys, which I had actually hidden in the freezer. She is completely pliable." My stomach lurched. I covered my mouth with my hand. Another voice spoke up. It was Sarah's husband. "And the medical records. We need a history of instability if the judge is going to grant you full guardianship of the inheritance." "Dr. Collins has already backdated the files," Mark replied smoothly. "We have 6 months of documented episodes and the prescriptions to match. Once we commit her, I get power of attorney over the trust fund from her grandmother. $30 million. Dave, your cut will clean up your debts." Sarah hit the pause button. The silence that followed was deafening. "They are talking about my grandmother's estate," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He told me he didn't care about the money." "He lied," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "He has been poisoning you. Julia, those vitamins he gives you every morning. They aren't vitamins. They are mild hallucinogens. That is why you feel foggy. That is why you forget things." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. The morning routine? Mark smiling, handing me the pill with a glass of juice, kissing my forehead, telling me it was for my health. For my health. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. Sarah looked down at her hands. "Because of the timeline," I heard them say. "They are coming for you tomorrow, at 8 in the morning. She looked up, her eyes pleading. "They are sending a transport team to take you to a private psychiatric facility in the mountains, an indefinite hold. Once you go in there, you won't come out. My husband is greedy. But this is evil. I can't be an accessory to this." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The nausea I had felt for months finally had a confirmed cause. It wasn't anxiety. It wasn't early onset dementia. It was Mark. Every time I felt dizzy, he was there to catch me. Every time I questioned reality, he was there to correct me. It was gaslighting, orchestrated with surgical precision. I slowly turned my head to look at the ceiling corner of the living room. The small red light of the security camera blinked rhythmically in the darkness. "He is watching me," I realized aloud. He checks the feeds constantly on his phone. Sarah warned, "If he sees me here?" I looked at the camera lens, really seeing it for the first time. I wasn't in a sanctuary. I was in a cage. And the man holding the key was across the street, selling my life for $30 million. I stumbled away from the living room, my hand clamped over my mouth, and barely made it to the guest powder room before my stomach rebelled. I fell to my knees on the cold tile floor and retched until there was nothing left but bile and the bitter taste of betrayal. It was a physical rejection of the lie I had been living. Every "I love you," every tender touch, and every concerned look from Mark now felt like a violation. I gripped the porcelain sink and pulled myself up, forcing my eyes to meet the mirror. The woman staring back at me was a wreck. Her collarbones protruded sharply. Her skin was the color of old parchment, and her hair was dull and lifeless. This was the masterpiece Mark had spent 6 months creating. He had not just drugged me, he had sculpted me into a victim. Fragments of the past half-year flashed through my mind, rearranging themselves into a horrifying new pattern. I remembered the dinner party 2 months ago when I dropped a wine glass. Mark had rushed over, not to help me, but to apologize to the guests. "She has been under so much pressure lately," he had whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "I am so worried about her mental state." It was a performance. All of it. The way he insisted on managing the bills because I was too forgetful. The way he isolated me from my friends, claiming I needed quiet time to recover. He had systematically dismantled my credibility so that when the end came, no one would believe me. He wanted the $30 million in my trust fund, the money he always swore meant nothing to him. "I only need you, Julia," he used to say. He was right. He needed me insane. Or he needed me dead. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face still streaked with rain and tears. She held her phone out to me again. "Look," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He just sent this to my husband." I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and looked at the glowing screen. The text message was brief and brutal. "Everything is set. Dr. Collins will be here at 8 in the morning with the transport team. Have the paperwork ready for the transfer of the assets immediately after she is secured." I stared at the timestamp. It was sent 2 minutes ago. Something inside me fractured, but it was not a break that left me weak. It was the cracking of a shell. The fear that had paralyzed me for months evaporated, burned away by a sudden white-hot fury. I thought of my father. I thought of the countless hours I had spent in his study, listening to him dismantle liars and criminals with nothing but logic and patience. I was not just Mark's wife. I was William Sterling's daughter. I splashed cold water on my face, washing away the tears and the vomit. When I looked up again, the fragile ghost in the mirror was gone. The eyes that stared back were cold, hard, and terrifyingly lucid. I walked back into the living room. My steps were no longer hesitant. I took the phone from Sarah's hand. "Do you have the recording file saved?" I asked. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, low and devoid of the tremors that had plagued me for weeks. "Yes," Sarah stuttered. I think so." "Good." I quickly navigated to her email app. My fingers flew across the screen, typing in a memory-hold email address I hadn't used in 3 years, a secure server my father had set up for me when I first moved out. I attached the audio recording and the screenshot of the text message. I hit send and watched the progress bar complete. The evidence was safe. I handed the phone back to Sarah. She looked at me, confused by the sudden shift in my demeanor. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "We have to call the police. We have to run." "No," I said firmly. "If we run, he spins a story that I had a psychotic break and kidnapped you. If we call the police now, he deletes everything, claims the recording was a joke or taken out of context, and his lawyer friends bury us in paperwork while he drains my accounts." I gripped Sarah's shoulders, looking deep into her eyes. "Thank you, Sarah. You saved my life tonight, but now I need you to do the hardest thing you have ever done." What she breathed, Go back to your house, I commanded, my voice steel. Dry off. Get into bed. Act like you never came here. I need them to believe their plan is working perfectly. I need them to walk into this house tomorrow morning thinking they have already won. Sarah hesitated, terror flickering in her eyes. But leaving you here with him, when he comes back, I won't be the victim when he comes back, I said, a dangerous calm settling over me. Now go, before he sees the empty house across the street. I watched her slip out into the rain, disappearing into the dark. I locked the door and turned back to the empty, silent house. The stage was set. Mark wanted a tragedy I would give him one, but he had cast himself in the wrong role. The silence that filled the house after Sarah left was no longer the heavy, suffocating weight of loneliness. It was the sharp, electric silence of a hunt. I did not reach for the landline to call the police. I knew Mark too well for that. He was a creature of plausible deniability. If the police arrived now, he would simply claim he was comforting a distressed neighbor, and I was the paranoid wife off her medication. To destroy a monster like Mark, I could not just wound him. I had to let him walk fully into his own trap. I moved through the house with the precision of a ghost. I descended the stairs to the basement, my bare feet making no sound on the cold concrete. In the far corner, behind a dusty landscape painting that Mark had always dismissed as flea market trash, was a wall safe he knew nothing about. It was a remnant of the life I had left behind. A fail-safe my father had insisted on installing when we bought the place. My fingers traced the keypad, entering a combination I had not used in 3 years. The lock clicked open with a satisfying mechanical thud. Inside lay a stack of documents proving my ownership of the house through a shell corporation and a single, outdated flip phone. I powered it on. The battery was still at 40%. I dialed a number I knew better than my own social security number. It rang only once. Dad. I started, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I am sorry. I didn't listen to you 3 years ago. You were right. He has finally shown his face. There was a pause on the other end, a silence that felt heavier than the storm outside. When the voice returned, it was not the voice of a worried parent, but the deep, resonant baritone of William Sterling, a man who commanded courtrooms with a single glance. I have been waiting for this call, Julia, he said, the lack of surprise in his tone chilling me. I never took my eyes off him. Don't worry. I am coming. He plans to move tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. I informed him. I know what needs to be done. Stay safe, my fierce girl. The line went dead. I placed the phone back in the safe and spun the dial. I returned to the bedroom, my mind racing through a checklist. I needed the stage to be perfect. I took the bottle of tampered vitamins from the bathroom cabinet and placed it prominently on the nightstand. I removed one pill and flushed it down the toilet, leaving the cap slightly unscrewed to suggest I had taken my nightly dose. I sat at my laptop in the darkened corner of the room, the screen dim. I composed a single email addressed to the family's private attorney, attaching the audio file Sarah had sent me. I did not hit send immediately. Instead, I scheduled it to be delivered at exactly 8 o'clock the morning. It would arrive precisely when Mark thought he was winning. At 1 o'clock in the morning, the garage door rumbled beneath the floorboards. I slipped into bed, pulling the duvet up to my chin. I slowed my breathing, mimicking the rhythm of deep sleep. A minute later, the bedroom door creaked open. I kept my eyes shut, but my other senses were dialed up to their maximum setting. I heard the soft thud of his shoes hitting the carpet. I smelled him before I felt him. He brought the scent of the rain with him, mixed with a cheap, cloying floral perfume. It was likely something he had sprayed on himself to throw me off, or perhaps the scent of Sarah's house. It made me want to gag. The mattress dipped as he climbed in beside me. He lay there for a long time, rigid and awake. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, a warmth that used to comfort me but now felt like the proximity of a predator. Almost done. He whispered into the darkness, his voice barely audible, assuming I was deep in a chemically induced stupor. Just hang in there. It is almost over. I lay perfectly still, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, letting the hatred sharpen my resolve. He was right. It was almost over, but not in the way he thought. The morning light that filtered through the heavy velvet curtains was gray and dismal. The rain had not ceased. It drummed a relentless mourning rhythm against the slate roof, sealing the house in a bubble of damp gloom. Inside, the air felt thick enough to choke on. I shuffled into the kitchen, dragging my feet in my slippers, wrapped in a thick robe. Mark was already there. He was dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, looking vibrant and well-rested, a stark contrast to the hollow-eyed reflection I had studied in the mirror moments before. He was whistling a soft, cheerful tune as he flipped an omelet in the pan. The smell of butter and eggs, usually comforting, made my stomach turn. "Good morning, sweetheart," Mark said, turning to me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You slept late? How are you feeling today?" I rubbed my forehead, feigning a wince. I don't know. Mark, my head feels heavy. And last night, I thought I saw shadows moving in the corners of the room again." Mark's expression shifted instantly to one of practiced concern. He turned off the stove and walked over to me, placing his hands on my shoulders. His touch felt like ice. "Oh, Julia," he sighed, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "The doctor said the hallucinations might get worse before they get better. You need rest. You need serious help." I nodded slowly, letting my gaze drift unfocused to the floor. "Maybe you are right. I feel like I am losing my mind. I am just here to take care of you," he whispered, pulling me into a hug. Over his shoulder, I saw him slide his phone out of his pocket. His thumb tapped a quick message under the cover of my embrace. When he pulled back, a faint, triumphant smirk lingered on his lips for a fraction of a second before vanishing behind his mask of worry. I sat at the island, picking at the food he placed in front of me. The digital clock on the oven displayed the time. It was 7:59. I watched the seconds tick by. 58, 59. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, the doorbell rang. Mark looked up, his eyebrows raised in exaggerated surprise. Now, who could that be this early in the morning? He walked out of the kitchen. I remained seated, gripping the edge of the granite counter until my knuckles turned white. I heard the front door open, followed by the murmur of low voices and the heavy tread of multiple pairs of shoes entering the foyer. Mark returned a moment later, flanking a group of 4 men. I recognized 2 of them immediately. Dr. Collins was a short, sweating man with shifty eyes who had prescribed my vitamins. Beside him stood Lawyer Prentice, Mark's college friend, clutching a black leather briefcase. Behind them loomed 2 large men in white medical scrubs, their faces blank and imposing. "Julia," Mark said, stepping forward with his hands raised in a calming gesture as if approaching a wild animal. "I was so worried about you that I called Dr. Collins. He is here to help you get the rest you need." Dr. Collins stepped forward, opening a file folder. He didn't look me in the eye. "Mrs. Vance, based on Mark's reports and your recent behavior, it is my professional opinion that you are suffering from acute paranoia and are a danger to yourself. We have arranged for a transfer to a private facility where you can be, monitored." I looked at the folder. It was thick with papers, fake reports, backdated assessments, lies manufactured to steal my life. "A facility?" I asked, letting my voice tremble. "But I don't want to go." "It is for the best, Julia," Lawyer Prentice interjected smoothly. He placed a document on the kitchen island and uncapped a fountain pen. "While you are away receiving treatment, you won't be able to manage your affairs. Mark needs to sign this power of attorney to handle the household expenses and the estate. It is just a formality to ensure your assets are safe while you recover. I looked from Prentice to Mark. Mark was looking at me with that same sickeningly tender expression, but deep in his eyes, I saw the gleam of victory. He thought he had done it. He thought the fragile, broken woman in front of him was about to hand over the keys to the kingdom. "Just sign the papers." "Mark," Prentice urged gently, "and then the gentleman can help Julia to the car." The two orderlies took a step forward, their presence a silent threat. The trap had snapped shut, but they didn't realize that I wasn't the one caught inside. Mark launched into a monologue that would have won him an award on Broadway. He turned to Dr. Collins, his face a mask of pained exhaustion, and gestured helplessly toward me. "It has been a nightmare, Doctor," Mark said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Just yesterday, I came home to find the gas stove running full blast." She was sitting on the floor, laughing at the blue flames. "If I had been 10 minutes later, this entire house would have been a crater." "That is a lie," I screamed, the injustice of it burning my throat. "You were the one cooking breakfast. You left the pan on the burner." Dr. Collins did not even blink. He scribbled something on his clipboard, shaking his head with pity. "Typical displacement," he murmured to the room, projecting her own dangerous negligence onto her caregiver. "It is a classic symptom of cognitive dissociation." "And the voices," Mark continued, ignoring my outburst. "She stands in front of the mirror for hours, talking to people who aren't there. Last night she held a knife to her wrist and told me she wanted to end the noise. I started to protest, but my voice cracked. The suffocation was absolute. Every word I spoke was twisted into evidence against me. If I stayed silent, I was catatonic. If I argued, I was aggressive. It was a perfect, inescapable circle of hell. Mark moved closer, invading my personal space. He took my cold, trembling hand in his warm ones, squeezing it with a pressure that was painful. "Please, Julia," he choked out, looking deep into my eyes with a gaze that seemed filled with love to the onlookers but felt like a physical assault to me. "Just sign the papers. I only want what is best for you. I will take care of everything. The house, the bills, the investments. You just focus on getting well." I looked at the document Lawyer Prentice had slid across the granite countertop. It was a durable power of attorney. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear. By signing my name on that dotted line, I would be handing over control of the Sterling family trust, my mother's legacy, and my own freedom to the man who had spent 6 months poisoning me. I hesitated, pulling my hand back slightly. Immediately, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The two large orderlies stepped forward, closing the distance. One of them reached into the pocket of his scrubs and pulled out a syringe, uncapping it with a dull click. The needle glinted under the kitchen lights. "Mrs. Vance," Dr. Collins said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming hard and authoritative. "We can do this peacefully, or we can administer a sedative to ensure your compliance for the transport. The choice is yours." It was a naked threat. Sign or be drugged and dragged out like a corpse. I looked around the room. The lawyer was checking his watch, bored. The doctor was already filling out the commitment forms. The orderlies were tensing their muscles, ready to pounce. And Mark was watching me with a hunger that made my skin crawl. I felt the cold, hard plastic of the pen pressed into my fingers. My hand shook violently. I lowered the pen to the paper. A single tear escaped my eye and splashed onto the document, creating a dark, wet spot on the crisp white page. It felt like I was signing my own death warrant. Mark leaned in close, his lips brushing against my ear. To the others, it looked like a comforting embrace from a loving husband, but his whisper was a hiss of pure venom. "Don't even think about fighting back." He breathed, his voice low and cruel. "No one believes a crazy person. Julia, you are alone. Sign it quickly, or I will have them strap you to a gurney right now." The silence in the kitchen was absolute. The only sound was the scratching of the pen tip hovering over the paper. Mark held his breath. Lawyer Prentice stopped tapping his foot. They were all waiting for the victory lap. I pressed the pen down. The ink started to flow. Then I stopped. I froze. The pen tip digging into the paper but not moving a millimeter. The trembling in my hand ceased abruptly. The sob that had been building in my chest evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp intake of breath. I slowly raised my head. I did not look at the lawyer. I did not look at the doctor. I looked straight at Mark. The tears were gone from my eyes. The fear had vanished from my face, replaced by a look of icy, lethal clarity. Mark blinked, confusion flickering across his features. He saw the change. He saw the predator wake up behind my eyes. "Mark," I said, my voice steady and devoid of the madness he had invented. "You really should have checked the security logs this morning." I opened my hand and let the heavy fountain pen fall. It hit the granite countertop with a sharp, dry clatter that echoed like a gunshot in the silent kitchen. The sound signaled the end of the performance. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I did not rise slowly or shakily as I had for the past 6 months. I stood with a fluid, commanding grace, my spine straightening until I loomed over the kitchen island. The hunch in my shoulders vanished. The dull vacancy in my eyes was replaced by a burning, focused intelligence. I was no longer the fragile bird Mark thought he had trapped. I was the hawk. "Mark, your performance has been truly Oscar-worthy," I said, my voice low and smooth, devoid of any tremor. "But there is a gaping hole in your script." Mark frowned, a flicker of genuine confusion marring his perfect mask of concern. He took a step back, his eyes darting between me and the doctor. "What are you babbling about? Julia, you are having another episode. Please, sit down before you hurt yourself." He reached for me again, but I slapped his hand away with a force that made a cracking sound. He recoiled, clutching his wrist, shock written all over his face. I walked over to the cabinet where the orange prescription bottle sat. I picked it up and rattled it. "You see this?" I asked, holding it up to the light. "I have not swallowed a single one of these pills in weeks. I flushed them, and just to be sure, I visited a private toxicology lab yesterday afternoon while you were supposedly at your late meeting with Sarah's husband." I reached into the pocket of my robe and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I tossed it onto the island. It slid across the smooth surface and stopped right in front of Dr. Collins. "Read it," I commanded. Dr. Collins picked up the paper, his hands shaking slightly. His eyes widened as he scanned the chemical breakdown. "Psilocybin derivatives and high doses of scopolamine," I recited from memory, staring Mark down. "An interesting choice for a vitamin supplement, wouldn't you say? Doctor enough to cause disorientation, memory loss, and mild hallucinations. Enough to make a sane woman look crazy to a judge. Dr. Collins went pale. He dropped the paper as if it were burning his fingers and took a step back, bumping into the counter. I didn't know. I was just following the—" "Shut up," Mark snarled at the doctor. He turned back to me, his face twisting into something ugly and desperate. "You are lying. You forged that. You are sick, Julia." I asked, tilting my head, a cold smile touching my lips. "And what about the power of attorney?" "Mark, did I hallucinate the offshore accounts? 2. Did I imagine the shell company, Vance Logistics, that you and Sarah's husband have been using to siphon money from the bank? I know about the laundering. Mark, I have the ledgers. I have the emails. I have everything." The color drained from Mark's face completely. He looked like a man watching his house burn down with him inside. Lawyer Prentice slammed his briefcase shut, looking for the nearest exit, his self-preservation instinct kicking in. Panic overtook Mark's reason. He realized he had lost control of the narrative, and his only option left was brute force. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his voice rising to a shriek. "She is dangerous. She is violent. Grab her, inject her now." The two orderlies lunged forward, syringes raised, moving with the heavy momentum of hired muscle. Lawyer Prentice backed into the corner, trembling. Mark was panting, his eyes wild with the need to silence me before I could say another word. But I did not scream. I did not run. I did not even flinch. I stood my ground, crossed my arms over my chest, and looked up at the wall clock above the refrigerator. The second hand was sweeping toward the 12. 3. I counted calmly, as the first orderly reached for my arm. 2. I continued, ignoring the cold needle inches from my skin. 1. The countdown ended not with a whimper, but with a thunderous crash that shook the very foundations of the house. The heavy oak front door was blasted off its hinges, sending splinters of wood flying across the foyer like shrapnel. Before the debris even hit the floor, the room was flooded with men in dark tactical gear, their weapons raised, moving with the terrifying efficiency of a breaking wave. "Federal agents, get on the ground. Now!" The command roared through the kitchen, bouncing off the granite surfaces. The orderly holding the syringe dropped it as if it were red-hot iron, raising his hands in immediate surrender. Dr. Collins let out a high-pitched yelp and scrambled backward, tripping over his own feet, while Lawyer Prentice dropped his briefcase and cowered against the refrigerator. Mark stood frozen in the center of the chaos, his mouth agape, his face draining of color until he looked like a wax figure. He stared at the uniformed officers swarming his home, unable to comprehend how his carefully orchestrated domestic tragedy had turned into a federal raid. Then, the sea of tactical vests parted. Walking through the shattered entrance was a man who commanded the room without saying a word. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Mark's car, and his silver hair was swept back in a severe, dignified style. It was my father, William Sterling. I watched Mark's eyes widen in absolute horror. He knew my father was wealthy. He knew he was retired. But he had never bothered to dig deep enough to know the truth. He was looking at the Honorable William Sterling, senior judge of the Federal Court of Appeals, a man whose gavel had dismantled crime syndicates and sent corrupt senators to prison. Mark realized, in that sickening heartbeat, that he had been trying to hustle a legend. My father did not even glance at Mark. He walked straight to me, his heavy footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. He reached out and wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight enough to crush the lingering fear in my bones. "I am sorry, Julia," he whispered into my hair, his voice rough with emotion. "I am so sorry I let you endure this for so long, but you were magnificent." Behind him, the scene was being dismantled. The chief of police stepped forward, pointing a gloved finger at the trembling doctor and the lawyer. "Arrest Dr. Collins and Mr. Prentice," he barked. "Charges include medical fraud, forgery of federal documents, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping." As the handcuffs clicked onto their wrists, another figure was led into the room by a plainclothes detective. It was Sarah. She was dry now, wearing a police-issue windbreaker. She looked small and frightened, but she was free. She kept her head down, refusing to look at Mark, her body language screaming shame and relief. Mark stared at her, betrayal flashing across his eyes. "Sarah, you sold me out." My father finally turned. He released me and stepped toward Mark. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He threw a thick manila folder onto the kitchen island. It landed with a heavy thud right next to the unsigned power of attorney. "That is a federal freeze order on every asset you possess." "Mark," my father said, his voice projecting with the terrifying resonance of a courtroom sentencing. "And that is an arrest warrant for wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and attempted grievous bodily harm. Mark trembled, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked from the police to me, and then to my father, his charm dissolving into desperate, pathetic pleading. "Dad, please," Mark stammered, holding his hands out, palms up. "You don't understand. I just wanted what was best for her. I was trying to help." My father cut him off with a look so sharp it could have drawn blood. He stepped into Mark's personal space, his eyes blazing with a fury that was all the more terrifying for its control. "Don't you ever call me Dad," he growled, the words vibrating with lethal intensity. "You are not family. You are a defendant." The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut around Mark's wrists was the most satisfying music I had ever heard. It cut through his frantic shouting, a sharp, mechanical punctuation mark on his life of deception. He did not accept his defeat with dignity. As the officers hauled him up from the floor, Mark began to thrash violently, kicking out at the legs of the men who held him. His face was a mask of purple rage, veins bulging in his neck as he screamed at the ceiling. "She set me up." "You are making a mistake," Mark bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. "Look at her. She is the unstable one. She planted the drugs. This is entrapment." The officers tightened their grip, forcing him toward the door. I raised a hand, signaling them to pause. I wanted one last moment. I needed him to hear the truth, not from a judge or a lawyer, but from the wife he thought he had broken. I stepped into his personal space. He stopped struggling for a second, panting heavily, his eyes darting frantically between my face and the badge of the federal agent holding his arm. I leaned in close until my lips were inches from his ear. "Do you really think I am that naive?" "Mark," I whispered, my voice steady and cold. "I knew you were siphoning money from the trust fund 6 months ago. I saw the discrepancies in the bank statements before you even started switching my pills." Mark froze. He turned his head to look at me, his eyes wide with shock. You knew," he stammered. "I knew everything." I continued, savoring the look of horror dawning on his face. "But financial fraud gets you a few years in a minimum security prison. That wasn't enough for me. I needed you to cross the line into physical harm. I needed you to drug me. I needed you to try to commit me. I waited for you to make the mistake of touching my body because that is what will put you away for 20 years. I pulled back slightly to look him in the eye, delivering the final blow. "And just so you know," I said, my voice hardening, "the house you are standing in, the Mercedes in the driveway, even that title of director you are so proud of, it is all owned by the Sterling Family Trust. I am the sole beneficiary. You don't own a single brick of this estate. You are leaving this marriage with exactly what you brought into it. Nothing." Mark opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by the hollow, crushing realization of total ruin. "Get him out of here," I commanded the officers. They dragged him out the shattered front door and into the relentless rain. Through the open doorway, I saw the flashing blue and red lights illuminating the street. The commotion had woken the entire neighborhood. People were standing on their porches under umbrellas, watching as the polished, successful Mark Vance was shoved unceremoniously into the back of a squad car. It was a public execution of his reputation. Inside the kitchen, the atmosphere was somber but resolved. Dr. Collins and Lawyer Prentice stood with their heads bowed, their hands cuffed behind their backs. They did not scream or fight. They were intelligent men, and they knew exactly who William Sterling was. They understood that fighting a case against my family was a futile endeavor. Their careers were over. Their licenses would be revoked, and they would spend the next decade in federal prison. They accepted their fate with the quiet resignation of men who gambled everything and lost. Sarah stood near the doorway, flanked by a female officer. She looked small and fragile in her oversized jacket. She lifted her eyes to meet mine. There was fear there, but also a deep, pleading apology. She had played a part in my torture, but she had also handed me the key to my freedom. "Thank you," I mouthed silently. Sarah let out a shaky breath and nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I watched as the officer led her out to a separate car. She would face consequences, but she would also have my help. I would make sure the court knew she was the whistleblower. The house finally fell quiet, save for the sound of the rain and the distant sirens fading into the night. My father walked over to me. He placed a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder. It was a grounding weight, a reminder that the storm was over. I leaned into him, feeling the solid, immovable presence of the man who had taught me that justice was not given, but taken. The nightmare was over. The monsters were in chains, and I was still standing. The last police cruiser pulled away, its tires crunching on the wet gravel of the driveway, taking with it the chaos and the noise of the night. The house settled back into silence, but the heavy, suffocating atmosphere that had plagued these halls for months was gone. It had been sucked out the door along with Mark and his accomplices. In its place remained a stillness that felt clean and absolute. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the war has been won. I walked to the French windows in the living room. The storm that had raged for hours was finally breaking. The relentless drumming of the rain had slowed to a sporadic drip, and through the breaking clouds, faint, watery shafts of morning sunlight were beginning to pierce the gloom. The gray sky was turning a soft, bruised purple, promising a clear day ahead. My father stood by the fireplace, watching me with a look of profound relief etched into his aged features. He held a manila folder in his hands, but he did not open it. He simply waited, giving me the space I needed to breathe. "The car is waiting." "Julia," he said softly, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. "You can come back to the estate with me. Your old room is exactly as you left it. You don't have to stay here in this place. It has too many bad memories." I looked out at the wet lawn, shining like emeralds under the rising sun. I thought about running back to the safety of my childhood home, to the fortress my father had built. It would be easy. It would be comfortable, but it would be a retreat. I turned to face him and shook my head slowly. "No, Dad," I said, my voice firm and resonant. "I am not running away. If I leave now, this house remains a monument to what Mark did to me. I won't let him have that power. I am going to stay. I am going to redecorate. I am going to paint over the walls he chose and burn the furniture he liked. This is my home, and I am going to take it back." My father smiled, a genuine expression of pride that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. He walked over to the coffee table and laid out a single document. It was a divorce petition, drafted and ready for my signature. "I thought you might say that," he said. "I had this prepared just in case." I picked up the pen. It was the same expensive fountain pen I had held earlier that morning when Mark tried to force me to sign away my life. But this time, my hand did not tremble. The weight of the pen felt empowering. I pressed the nib to the paper and signed my name. The ink flowed dark and permanent, severing the legal ties to 5 years of blindness and manipulation. With that signature, I wasn't just ending a marriage, I was exorcising a ghost. I put the pen down and wrapped my arms around my own waist, my hands resting gently against my stomach. I was not pregnant. There was no new life growing inside me to replace the pain. Instead, I was embracing the life that was already there, my life. For 6 months, I had been fading, allowing myself to be erased by a man who saw me as nothing more than a bank account. Now, I could feel the blood pumping in my veins, the steady rhythm of my heart, the sheer, undeniable reality of my own existence. I realized then that the greatest revenge wasn't seeing Mark in handcuffs or knowing he would spend the next 2 decades in a federal cell. The true revenge was that I was going to be happy. I was going to live a life so vibrant, so full of joy and success, that his memory would be reduced to nothing more than a footnote in my biography. He had tried to bury me, but he forgot that I was a seed. I walked over to the window and unlatched the lock. I threw the glass doors open wide. A gust of cool, rain-washed air rushed into the room, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine needles. It filled the stale, stagnant air of the house with something fresh and wild. I stepped out onto the porch and filled my lungs, breathing in deeply, tasting the oxygen like it was fine wine. The sun broke fully through the clouds, bathing my face in warm, golden light. I closed my eyes and smiled. The nightmare was over. The morning had come. And for the first time in a long time, the future belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below sharing your city or country, and let's connect. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.